Good evening. Today I would like to tell you about GraphQL, about its basics, and about my emotions. So my name is and my talk even has shorthand title. So my name is Evgenii Shkodin, and I work at the Evil Martians, and we love open source. You probably using some of these libraries, maybe, I don't know. And if you're a Ruby developer, you know some of these libraries. But most importantly, we are providing IT consultancy and developing products for our clients. And before we start, I would like to make a quick poll about your knowledge of GraphQL. So how many of you know that GraphQL is not some spell from Harry Potter universe? Raise your hand. OK, it's fine. OK. Maybe some of you even using it in your project, in your pet projects. OK, less hands. So, and maybe someone even using it in production. OK, so let's start then. In 2011, Facebook decided to focus their development on mobile. But there was a problem. Soon enough, they realized that web development is kind of slow, and they wanted to support some native applications. But they have server that returning just were operating only with templates, and native mobile want to use just pure data. So they needed another server. And they decided to use RESTful API architecture. But again, soon enough, they realized that it's not that flexible, and it's hard to support different platforms with this architecture. And they invented FQL. Somebody know what FQL is? Exactly? Yeah. But in 2012, they invented GraphQL, but only for internal use. And only in 3 years, they decided to publish it. And they have a problem. Because if they just publish some JavaScript library, there weren't. They wanted to have some framework agnostic or language agnostic thing. So they decided to release a specification. And now we have a document that can be used by any language, by any framework, or any tool that you want if you just follow this specification. And nowadays we have just vast, large ecosystem of GraphQL, which I will tell you about tomorrow. Oh, today. Okay. So what was the problem with RESTful API? If we have this kind of Facebook page, and we want to fetch data for our friends and for our photos, we need to perform the first query, like to get the data for our photos, and then second query to get the data for our friends. And you may see that we are fetching a lot of data that we don't need. So we don't need description or comments or likes of the photos. So we are overfetching. But there is another approach, AdHoc requests, when we want to fetch all the data that we need for this view. And, well, you may guess that it's not that scalable and totally unmaintainable, because we need another URL for each view on each platform that we have. So, overfetching. As I already told you, it was the problem when you fetch too much data that you need. Underfetching is when we need to perform multiple requests on our first load. Data mapping. So different platforms need different views. We need different data, and we always need to map our data to just work with it. And total unpredictability, because we are operating only with URLs. And if our backend engineer changed something, we just don't know about it until we perform a request. So it all turns out to difficult cross-platform support. But the main question that Facebook engineers were thinking about is how we think about the data. And the answer is kind of simple. We are thinking in objects and in properties and in relations between them. So basically, you may see the graph. So this is how GraphQL was invented. But what is GraphQL? As I already told you, it's a specification. And this specification consists of two parts. The first one is the query language. So just the way how we should describe to our server the data that we need to fetch. And the second part is the execution engine. It's just the specification of how our server should operate with the queries, with the validation, with the returning data. So basic concepts. The hello world of GraphQL is like this slide. You may see it on multiple another presentations and talks. So we see that we want to fetch me and my name, and basically we are getting it. Just this simple. But how it works? Every graph has its entry points, and in GraphQL we have exactly three: the queries, mutations, and subscriptions. What is query? So you may see that we have query keyword, like here. Then we have the name of this query. And then we are describing the fields that we want to fetch. So we need a name, we need a bio, the avatars. And you see that we can fetch the same field twice with different parameters using aliases, like avatar large and avatar small. So socials, maybe some photos, and friends. And you see that we are fetching only the fields that we need to, to render data on the page. So the second one is the mutations. Mutations are needed to just to mutate or change some data on your server, on your database. So we have another keyword mutation, the name of the mutation, the name of the operation, some arguments that we can provide. And again, we are telling the server what fields we want to get after this mutation is ended. So if we need to create post, we're just providing it some arguments and getting the author, the body, the ID, and the date of this post. And the last one is subscriptions. So it's just the way to fetch some real-time data updates. So we have keyword subscription, we have feed, updates the name and the name of the operation post-edit, and again, the same fields that we want to get if we, and when we are getting this return from, I don't know, WebSockets or something like that, we can just insert the data inside our Facebook page. Another basic concept is directive. It's just the way to extend the syntax of our queries. So you see that we have include. It's directive with variable with friends. So basically, if with friends is true, we are fetching friends in our query, and if it's false, we are fetching only the name. So let's come to the server part of GraphQL. Server consists of two parts. The first one is the schema. So we have these entry points, and the schema is a reflection just of our entry points. So we have queries, mutations, and subscriptions. And we have even a special schema definition language to define our schema. And it's strongly typed. So we have, firstly, the root types, the query, subscription, mutation, and then any scalar types or any complex types that you know from another strongly typed languages or Flow, for example. So we have strings, float, integers to type our schema that is validated during the querying of data or mutation of data. We have exclamation marks to define non-nullable values. We have just square brackets to define lists, and IDs just to define IDs. And the second part of our server is resolvers. So it's basically the list of function that compared with our schema. So if we have query and we have field user on the query, we providing it with 4 arguments. The first one is the object. It's just the result of function of parent resolver. I will explain it a little bit later. The arguments that we are providing our query with, like IDs, context is just some data that we want to access in any resolver, and the info about query itself. So we are making a request to our database with the arguments of ID and returning our user. And this user goes to exactly to our user resolver as object. And to get its name, we just return an object name, and that's all. So that was the boring part. And now we need some intermission. Just take a deep breath. So I want to proceed to the part about the ecosystem, about my emotions about its ecosystem, and how cool is that? So introspection. It's the basic concept that is providing so much power to our GraphQL applications, our GraphQL ecosystem. It's the way to ask our GraphQL schema, our server, for information about meta information. So we could get any queries, any mutations, any data types from our server in just one request. And this is how it works. In any implementation of GraphQL, we have graphical. It's just an in-browser IDE for exploring GraphQL. So our GraphQL server is self-documenting. We always want that our server will be self-documenting, because we don't need to do anything with that. Because we have strongly typed schema, we have functions, we know how it's resolving. And so the biggest graphical, I think, in web is the GitHubs. Some of you may know that the 4th version of GitHub API is in GraphQL. So they have the biggest graphical. And this is how it looks. So on the right side, you see like it's a schema. And we can follow to any object, any property. And we see its type. And in the left part, we can provide, we can perform our query. And for example, ask for viewers' login, company, and location. And so we get them. And I don't know, I think it's very cool, because we always wanted something like that for front-end developers. So they, because every time if I want to just add some new queries to my project, I want to know what the possibilities of my server is. So this is how it, you can do it in GraphQL. So any tool should have a CLI, I think. And GraphQL has its CLI, and it's very good. And we can use it for different things, for creating projects, for getting our schema, for checking its status, and even to see its diff. If on the server something is changed, we can pull some new data, just start our server, and run this command to see the difference in the server schema and the schema on your local computer. So I created a small project with the Star Wars API, just some basic resolvers, that's some small schema, just in 100 strings, I think. We have small config file, and we can just use CLI to get our schema. Oops. So we have it, and we know all the types, all the fields, all the queries possible, just like that. Another thing is when something has changed on our server, and we just performing this command, and we see that there were some breaking changes, that something has changed, and we need to change our code, refactor something. I think it's very cool. Because, I don't know, if you're working with the RESTful API, you should always asking your backend developer if something has changed, if, I don't know, if he moved something, he fixed some typo, and in the GraphQL, you can just don't bother him. Every tool should have its extension. For example, in VS Code. And in VS Code, we have really cool extension for GraphQL, especially for front-end developers. So this is how it looks. And we can create our GraphQL file to query something, I don't know, to query character. So we start writing query, get character, and want to have character. But there's something is wrong. So we see that there are two types of errors, that we didn't provide the variable argument, and we didn't provide subfields for this character. And we also see all the types, all the subfields that this type has. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and if we fix these errors, everything will be just fine. So we are providing it with the argument, and with some subfield. And everything is cool. Just we can perform this query, and everything will be fine. We can be totally sure about it. So we are getting auto-completion, query validation, snippets, and even syntax highlighting. So I think it's great extension, and I already can't just imagine my life without it. Also, you're probably facing a lot of problems when you try to build some new feature, but you are doing it in parallel with your backend engineer, and you need some data to mock. So with GraphQL Faker, you can do it without any code, without writing any code. You just start in the GraphQL Faker server, and you will see the similar to graphical interface. So we have some planets and characters to fetch in our schema. But for example, we want to add some new field with the image URL of our character. So we just go into the second tab and extending our type character with the image URL, with type of it, and even we can provide image category. It's all powered by fake.js, I think. And after we extended our type, we are getting this field on our schema, new. And if we will just perform a query with image URL, we are getting these fake URLs. That's how simple it is. Another thing is, cool thing is Apollo. It's a big company that make GraphQL their business model, and they have different frameworks for it. But the cool thing is Apollo Boost, especially for developers, front-end developers, because we can start using our queries, I think, in just 3 lines of code. We are installing some basic libraries, importing them, and creating a client. And after we created a client, we can perform any queries that we want in just 3 lines of code. Another cool thing, you may thinking about that we have strongly typed schema and how we can use it with our strongly typed languages. And we can do it easily. Just in one command, we can convert our schema to, for example, TypeScript interfaces. So we just, and this is how simple it is. We just run one command and get in all the TypeScript interfaces about our schema. And the last one, killer feature from the last specification, is defer directive. You're probably also facing a lot of troubles with fetching big data that you don't actually need in the first load. For example, if you have like big feed with the posts, and this post has its likes, has its comments, and the comments actually is not that relevant data. You need title, you need some value of this post, but you don't need the comments and likes, etc. So we can provide it with defer directive. And you will see the difference. So in the right column, we're fetching data with defer directive, and all our comments loading deferred after the relevant data. And in the left column, we're fetching data, all the data, and it's really slower. And it's all in-box things in GraphQL, and I think it's very cool. So we came already to the end. So there are some talks that you may want to see, especially Lee Byron, because he's one of the inventors of GraphQL. Also, there are some Russian talks if you want to hear about GraphQL downsides and how you can just override them. And some articles, for example, you may not need GraphQL. Yeah, very important article if you want to start using it. Also, some useful links, specification, documentation, full stack tutorial, and awesome GraphQL. I told you about some 3, 4, 5 tools, libraries, and this how many of them actually are existing. A lot of them, like for any language that you can imagine, any frameworks, a lot of them. It's a really long video, very long. Also, there are not only list of the libraries, but of some books, tutorials, talks, articles, and anything you can imagine about GraphQL. Very cool. And this is the end. Like, subscribe, likes, and especially the Instagram of the cat that helped me with the Facebook page. And that's all. Yep. Questions?
Any questions?
Thank you so much for telling us about GraphQL. My question is not about the tools you mentioned and the concepts that you showed, but rather when you actually talk to your backend developers, what do they tell you about GraphQL, how it affects their mental model, how they write code for endpoints? Mm-hmm. Does it simplify and improve their workflow?
Well, my backend developer is really excited about it. So he likes it, but we have not that big product. So if you check like this, these two Russian talks about GraphQL, there are a lot of information about limitations of GraphQL, about how we can like override them, like make them not bad for our servers. But but for backend developers, I think it's kind of similar with the REST API, but you are not, because it's Because anyway, you need to get some data
I can
and
ask
return
the
some data.
more specific question. For example, you as a front-end developer, you have the ability to not to overfetch data. Is it really the same for for backend developers to implement APIs in such a way that it doesn't overfetch data from different services in their microservice architecture, for example?
It's a great question, and it's kind of the large one, and that's why I provide you with these 2 great talks about it, because it's kind of the reason why I didn't add some downsides of GraphQL to this talk, because first of all, it's more relevant for backend developers rather than front-end developers, and the secondly that it's kind of big theme. I just can't answer it like right now.
Okay, that's okay.